This is a collection of real-life horror stories. These stories are told by various different people who personally experienced paranormal events. Story 1. The Possessed Girl. This happened when I was around 12 years old. My mom took my siblings and I to visit her mom in her hometown in Mexico during our summer break. As soon as we got there, we were told not to wander close to the neighbor's house. Strange things seemed to be happening there. Apparently, the 16-year-old that lived across the street was possessed. My grandmother actually used the phrase "has the devil in her." It started with the girl, don't remember her name, hearing somebody whisper, then she claimed she was able to hear footsteps that followed her everywhere. She stopped eating, sleeping, and every morning would find scratches and bruises all over her body. The priest had been called and he had blessed the house several times, but it didn't seem to stop. Her parents had to send their other children to stay with grandparents because they were too scared to stay in the house with her, as she was beginning to have violent/manic episodes. Some people in town said that when they walked by that house they felt uneasy, and some even claimed they saw shadows and heard strange noises. My cousins were scared to walk there and would rather go the opposite way and walk around the block just to get to a store that was 2 houses down from that house. By the way, this house was across the street from my grandma and 2 houses to the left, 2 houses left of the house that was right across the street. Hope that makes sense. I'm not going to lie, I was scared too, but I also had this morbid curiosity. Every time we had to leave my grandma's house I looked that way and stared, not really knowing what I was hoping to see. One morning, I woke to the grown-ups talking about what had happened across the street during the night. Apparently, a big stain appeared overnight in one of the walls. A stain that looked a lot like blood. They washed the stain with soap and water and painted over where the stain was. By that evening, the stain was there again. They went to get the priest and once again cleaned the stain and prayed while the priest blessed the house and threw holy water at the wall. By morning, the stain was back. The word around town spread and people had gathered and formed prayer groups. It seemed they were praying non-stop. One group of people would leave and others would show up, all carrying rosary beads. My cousins, siblings, and I were under strict orders not to get close to that house. My grandma thought we might also get possessed or something might follow us home. Of course, us being kids, we decided we wanted to go and look at this blood stain on the wall. So off we went, hiding behind other people so our grandma and mothers wouldn't see us. There were a lot of people and not everyone fit inside the house, or they were afraid to go in. There were a lot of people just outside the entrance. As we got closer, we heard a girl yelling as if in pain. We also heard growling, but I'm not sure if the girl was also making these noises. Everyone there was praying the rosary in unison, but you were able to hear the girl's voice crying and asking for help. Then she would start yelling, screaming, and you would hear growling. At this point, my cousins, my brother and my sister had turned back in fear. My sister grabbed my arm and tried pulling me back, but I had to see for myself who was making those noises. I pushed my way inside the house, and what I saw next I will never forget. I saw a girl tied with ropes to a banister of the house. She looked to be almost just skin and bones. I don't know what I was expecting to see, but it shocked me and I gasped. For a second there it almost seemed like she heard me and turned my way. I swear she was staring straight at me and smiled. I was frozen in my spot, unable to move. Then I felt someone pull me back so hard I almost lost my balance. It was my grandmother that was dragging me out of there. I don't think I ever saw her that mad. She was fit to be tied. As was the norm, I got in a lot of trouble for disobeying, only this time I was really sorry that I did. I was so scared and kept seeing the girl's face and grin in my head every time I closed my eyes. I thought for sure she was going to get loose and come for me. Days after that we headed back home to the US. Last I heard the girl had gotten better. No one is sure if the priest coming over and blessing the house every day or the town folk praying non-stop is what helped her, but they say that a witch, Brujo, was also summoned. His belief was that this was not a demonic possession but a very strong case of witchcraft/black magic. Apparently, this was done to her out of jealousy. She was very pretty and caught the eye of the wrong man. After she got better, she was sent away to live with relatives in the US. I don't know exactly what was wrong with her and how she got better. All I am sure of is that I saw her with my own eyes, saw the condition she was in, and heard the most god-awful noises come out of her such as I've never heard before. Many years have passed, but this is something that is very clear in my memory. I still remember that face and that smile, and it still scares me to this day. Story 2. House of Demons. A few years ago, I moved into a one-bedroom apartment in Melbourne, Australia. It was my first time living on my own. The apartment block had been built in the 1930s. I'd been there for a few months when I came home from work one day and went into the bathroom. I saw something strange. The wooden board covering a hole in the ceiling that led to a small attic space lay broken in 2 pieces on the ground. I examined the broken pieces. The board was an inch thick, and it would have taken Bruce Lee to break it. I thought the landlord had sent someone to work in the attic. I was frozen stiff with fear. I thought, someone is up there for sure. I emailed pictures to the landlord asking if anyone had been there, with an undertone of annoyance, since she hadn't warned me. Her reply read, "Please call me as soon as you are able to." I called, and she explained that her last 2 tenants had said the same thing happened. She promised to replace the board, and she did. A month later, I woke up one night around 4 a.m. I had so many goosebumps, it felt like someone was rubbing his or her hands on me. Everything was silent, but then I heard this sound coming from above my bed. It was a dragging sound, like someone pulling a sack of potatoes. I was frozen stiff with fear. I thought, someone is up there for sure. There is no way an animal could make that sound. After 5 minutes, I managed to work up the courage to turn on the light and walk to the bathroom. I was armed with a cricket bat. When I looked, I saw that the new board covering the hole was broken in 2. I felt sick. The dragging sound had stopped. But I heard something else, whispering. The sound was clear and coming from the attic. It sounded like children's voices, and I could hear one sentence repeated over and over. "It's your turn. It's your turn." I switched on every light in the apartment to make things feel normal. It was 5 a.m. and dark outside. I watched TV to try to unwind. Then a fuse blew. My pet budgie, Dexter, whom I kept in the kitchen, usually never made a sound at night, but he started squawking like he was being strangled. I'd never heard him make those sorts of noises. He was screaming. I grabbed my car keys, ran out, sat in my car, and waited there until the sun came up. When I saw people walking their dogs, this comforted me enough to go back in. The front door was open, but I thought I hadn't closed it when I'd run out. I went to the kitchen to check on Dexter, and he wasn't in his cage. I felt sick again. All my windows were closed, so I looked everywhere inside. When I walked to the bathroom, I heard splashing. Dexter was half drowned in the toilet. I took him out, washed him, and dried him. I was so confused. At 8 a.m., I called the landlord and gave her a watered-down version of the night. "Oh, wow, you heard the whispering too," she said. I stayed in that apartment for another 18 months. I heard the whispering on a few occasions, and twice the board covering the hole in the ceiling moved. Although I live elsewhere, the landlord recently called. She said that her new tenants had begged to speak with me about some of the stuff that's been going on there. Forget it, it's their problem now. Story 3. The Stranger in the Elevator. I heard this when I was in Korea. One day a girl was walking home late at night after work, or something. It was dark and around midnight. She lived in an apartment where they had an elevator. She got in the elevator, and when the door was about to close, a strange man with a very red hoodie entered the elevator. He apologized for scaring her and asked which floor she was heading to, without making eye contact. She told him out of fear, and the man casually pressed the button and the one below. As they were on the way, he asked her for her cell phone if he could use it, but she declined out of suspicion and isolated herself in the corner. After seconds of silence, the elevator arrived to the floor below the one the girl was heading to, and the door opened. The guy slowly walked out of the door and turned around facing toward the elevator and the girl, and just stared at her without any movement. Slowly the door started to close, and from the gap, she could see him turning around heading for upstairs, pulling a knife out of his pocket. Story 4. The Possessed Friend. One time my husband and I had some friends over to eat pizza. One of my friends, who has always been very mystical, began to feel ill in the kitchen and excused himself to our bedroom. Once he was in the bedroom, he started to rock back and forth and giggle in a voice that made my hair stand on end. I ran out of the room, shivering with fear. My husband went in to check on him and soon returned saying our friend wanted to talk to me. I went into the bedroom, where my friend walked up to me with his eyes rolled back into his, made a few little grunts and said, "This is my house." Then he knelt and kissed my feet, rubbed his hand on my belly, and motioned as though he was nursing a baby. When he knelt again, the phone rang loudly and he came out of the trance. About a month later I found out I was pregnant, which may explain the gesture he made. Story 5. The Person in the Dark. My family traveled to the south of France to stay in a cottage owned by someone my dad worked with. The owners visited occasionally, but that summer it was free, and we had 10 days booked there. After a long 2 days on the road, we drove down a steep driveway towards a secluded mill cottage, with the water wheel sitting static alongside the stone house. There was a deep cellar with stone stairs down under the wheel next to the house, and a small river circled the place. We went into the house and chose rooms, but being set down in a small copse, the house was draught and cold from lack of use. We settled in and turned all of the heating on, yet the house remained cold and felt damp. The first night we had set a fire in the living room and listened to a couple of audio books before my sister and I went to sleep. My parents stayed up a little longer, then went to bed. Around midnight they both woke up at exactly the same time, and the door to their bedroom was opening slowly. At first they thought it was my sister until they saw a large dark silhouette of a man framed in the doorway, standing stock still, just looking in their direction as if appraising them. After a short period, the shape turned and started to move, as if satisfied, and disappeared. They looked at each other, but didn't speak, and both went back to sleep. The next morning the house felt warm and dry, and sunlight was back through the windows, as if something had lifted and accepted them. They spoke the next day and both agreed that although they were skeptics, it could not have been anything other than something supernatural in that doorway, deciding their worth. Story 6. Kitchen Nightmare. Okay, get ready for this story. So I was closing up the bar one night after a long shift. As I was carrying a rack of glasses into the kitchen, I slipped on the wet floor I had just mopped, fell to the floor, and let out an instinctual "Ah!" Immediately after, as I'm sitting on the wet floor, I hear a low-pitched moan. It was so audible that I actually thought it was a real person. This was startling considering I was the only person left in the bar. I stood up, completely frozen, and yelled, "Hello?" Again, immediately, I hear the same low-pitched moan, except this time it was louder. Now I'm starting to freak out a little bit, but for whatever reason, I decide to walk closer to where I heard the sound coming from. I yell very loudly, "Hello?" For the third time, I now hear a very loud, low-pitched moan. That was it for me. I ran back into the kitchen, grabbed the biggest kitchen knife I could find, because that seemed logical at the time, grabbed my purse, ran out the door, and never looked back. It was funny trying to explain to the chef the next day why he was missing a knife during his morning prep. The creepiest part? I came to find out that there was some sort of accident that had occurred in the restaurant years before, with the son of the owner, and word around town was that he died right there in the bar. Story 7. The Haunted Room. In 2015, I went on a trip to DC for the 4th of July with my family. We visited George Washington State in Virginia. It was the middle of the day, scorching hot. And there was absolutely no air conditioning in the house aside from a few fans placed sparingly. I'm a huge history buff, so I was very excited about touring the house, and I knew a lot about George Washington and his state previously. So I knew that he had passed away in his bedroom in 1799, but that was definitely not what I was thinking about when our tour guide led our group upstairs to go see said bedroom. His bedroom had a lot of really delicate artifacts in it, so we weren't allowed to go inside. And there were little plastic barriers preventing us from doing so. But you could stick your head into the room and look around. For some reason, I was the only one in the group who decided to take a look. When I stuck my head into the room, I was immediately struck by how absolutely freezing cold it was in there. And I don't mean that there was a light breeze. It was as if I had stuck the upper half of my body into a walk-in freezer. I was confused by this because there didn't seem to be any air conditioning in the room. So I looked around to try and see if there was a fan or an AC unit that I just wasn't noticing. But I didn't see one. I decided to take my head out of the room and ask our tour guide why it was so cold in there. But then I realized that I couldn't move. I was paralyzed from the waist up. Every part of my body that was in the room was completely stuck in place. I struggled to pull myself out but couldn't. I started to panic and tried to open my mouth to call for help, but when I opened my mouth, no sound came out. All of a sudden, from the other side of the room, where there was a little piece of furniture, a mirror and a water basin, probably where Washington washed his face and shaved in the morning, I felt what I can describe as nothing other than a pair of eyes staring at me. Almost like the sensation of someone staring at you while you sleep. I didn't see a figure or anything but felt this huge and intimidating presence walk towards me and stare me down. It was horrifying. And I physically could not tell you how much time passed in that moment because it really felt like it could have been an hour. But I guess it was only a few seconds. After a while I finally broke free from my paralysis and almost fell backwards onto my butt. My mom asked me what was wrong and I told her that I wanted to leave. She didn't believe me when I told her the story later, but it still scares me to this day. Story 8. The Man from the Dream. My mother always complained that she had a lot of nightmares, but she would never say what her dreams were about. One day while we were at the mall, I suggested that she wait in the food court while I was getting our food. When I returned with our meals, she had a strange look on her face, so I asked her if she was okay. She said she was fine, so we finished our meals and left. As we were riding down the escalator to leave, I turned to talk to my mother, and I almost had a heart attack because standing behind her was a man in old-fashioned clothing holding one of my mother's shoulders and looking at me with a very angry expression. She saw the shock on my face right away and shouted at me asking what was wrong. When I told her what I had seen, she started crying and said, "You just described the man that tries to kill me every night in my nightmares." Story 9. The Boy with No Eyes. One night when I was 10, I was woken up by my bedroom door opening, followed by someone sitting on my bed. I felt my leg grazed and the bed sink under a person's weight. Thinking it was my mom, I opened my eyes to see an eyeless boy. He had black empty sockets, about my age, sitting at the foot of my bed. He extended his hand, and in it was a little box. I was startled but reached out. He pulled back. I reached again and said, "Give it!" Then I blinked, and when I reopened my eyes he was gone, but the imprint of someone sitting on my bed was present. Fast forward 5 years. My girlfriend came over to do homework. After she finished, she took a nap while she waited for her parents. When they arrived, I tried waking her up. She opened her eyes suddenly, looking up at a corner where the wall met the ceiling. She pointed there and went back to sleep. I shook her again. She came to full consciousness, and I explained what she'd done. She said, "Up on the wall, I saw a little boy with no eyes. He was there in a Spider-Man pose, staring at me." I freaked out and told her my story about the same kid. Fast forward another 5 years. I was with the same girlfriend, and we had a 2-year-old. We were living in my parents' house, in my old room. My daughter started waking up at the same time every night, and she'd talk. After a while, I noticed she had almost the same conversation every night. I playfully asked her once whom she was talking to. She said, "It's a little boy. He's nice. He's lost and looking for his mommy." My daughter's nightly conversations continued until we got our own place later that year. Story 10. The Invisible Patient. The ambulance company that I used to work for had a haunted ambulance, Rig 12. A lot of EMTs had stories about it, but I never put much stock in paranormal stuff. That is, until I had my own experience with Rig 12. My partner and I were working in a rural community at 3 a.m., and it was pitch dark and completely quiet. We were both dozing. I was in the driver's seat, and she was in the passenger seat. I woke up to a muffled voice, and I thought my partner was talking. I told her I was trying to sleep and closed my eyes. I distinctly heard a male voice say, "Oh my God, am I dying?" followed by a few seconds of heavy breathing. My partner and I sat up straight and looked back into the patient compartment, where it sounded like the voice had come from. Things were quiet for a couple seconds, then we heard the click of an oxygen bottle regulator and a hiss, as if it was leaking. I turned on the lights, and we ran out of the rig. I thought a transit might have climbed in while we were asleep, so we opened the rear doors. No one was there. I checked the oxygen bottles, neither was opened. We didn't sleep much after that.